I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com.
So that is the footage released by the guards this week, showing the moment that the house in Edenderry that was set on fire in a firebomb attack and obviously had extremely grim and tragic consequences.
Yeah, it's basically harrowing footage, because we all know now that there was an innocent boy, Tadgh Farrell, 4, and 2 innocent women in that house. And people who've watched the CCTV, it's up on Crime World, they'll be able to see that there's 2 guys in dark clothing with hoods up come running up to the window of the home on Saturday night last, around, I think it was around between 7 and 8 p.m. One uses an implement to break the window, and then you can see the other light a petrol bomb, and it's thrown into the window of the broken window. And then we know then that tragically Tadgh and his grandaunt Mary Holt lost their lives, and Tadgh's grandmother was seriously injured. I think she's still in hospital.
Yeah, so 7:45, this firebomb was thrown into the home in Castleview Park, and literally it's, within minutes lives are lost. And it's really as simple as that. These fire bombings are going on with relative regularity across the country. They obviously have happened in very extreme circumstances up in Drogheda during that feud, where they were almost, they were, a weekly occurrence.
Yeah.
But it just takes a few seconds for this to cause a death, and in this case 2 deaths. And as you said, you can see a couple of guys who look young. It's very hard to tell.
They do look young, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there is some reports that one of them may be very, very young. Now, the guards obviously are still investigating that and have yet to make any arrests. But in all likelihood, the people that have committed this grim, murderous crime are young lads who are probably being paid. Look, they're not being paid 4-figure sums for doing this.
They probably owe debts themselves. So
last night there was a vigil for in the local area.
Yeah.
I mean, Edenderry in Offaly is a very normal sort of town. Yeah. Quite well-to-do in parts, but obviously the community are coming out there and they're connecting it with the drugs trade. I mean, that's what the march was entitled.
Yeah, it was at Brian's Park, and it was a candlelit vigil. It was organised by Derry Rovers Football Club, and over 600 people attended. So yeah, it was a march. I think it was a march of light against drugs or something along those lines. So yeah, it is, because as we've reported this week, that incident was absolutely horrific, and it's in the news because of the 2 murders, which is what they were. But there's so many of these instances happening, and a lot of them are linked to this drugs gang. There was over 12 firebombs being linked to that drugs gang. So yes, while the vigil is obviously focused on the 2 tragic victims who were completely innocent, I think, as you said, the local community are just not had enough with drug intimidation going on in the locality.
Yeah, now we've done lots of podcasts about drug intimidation, and even more recently, we spoke about a trial where extreme violence was used. And it is a kind of a trend in gangland crime in Ireland. The number of shootings has gone down for the obvious reason that these sort of fatal shootings that were much more common, a decade ago. A lot of them are being solved, and the advances in forensic techniques and CCTV harvesting. But gone alongside that, there has been an upswing, particularly in rural Ireland, of this kind of very, very heavy drug intimidation. It's very much, extreme violence being used over relatively small amounts. Now, we don't know. The guards released this footage. They put out a statement, including where they said they were basically keeping an open mind on, who's responsible and what are the motives. However, there is lines of inquiry, and they include a kind of a rural Midlands drugs gang, I suppose, that stretches across Offaly and Kildare.
Yeah.
And that drugs gang, or that broader organisation, they have been linked to a couple of murders before.
Yeah, so the drugs gang stretches across Westmeath, Offaly and Kildare, and as Ken Foy's reported for us this week, they've been linked to at least 2 murders. Now, the murders are going back a long time. There was the murder of a Lithuanian man in 2015. He was beaten, left for dead in a field. His name was, forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but his name was Silvestris Stokus. And his body was dumped in a field in March 2015. And then we also had this double murder which happened in a house in Cloncock, and it was a Talaman, Andy Barry, I think you're familiar with that case, and Lithuanian man. They were killed. This was in 2012, and they're been linked to this gang.
Yeah, so I reported on that at the time. I mean, Andy Barry was he had familial links to Troy Jordan. I don't think he was a blood relative, but through marriage he had been linked to him. And he had acted as an enforcer. Troy Jordan obviously would have been a criminal whose name had popped up many times over the years. But Andy Barry was an enforcer, a sort of dangerous sort of guy. And he was part of, I suppose, this expansion of the drugs trade from West Dublin really into that Kildare and that sort of area, where there was a lot of money to be made. And he'd been involved in a number of feuds at the time with people from Tadgh, but also, other fallings out, because he was a guy who'd been linked to sort of shootings, intimidations, and he was involved in the collection of money. However, this gang ultimately are sort of the chief suspects for carrying out that murder. And it was a very brutal murder. They called to the house. They shot Andy Barry, his friend, a guy called Zilvanius Varankos, again, could be pronounced wrong.
Muskas, I think. Is that right? Sorry.
Could be right, yeah. He tried to sort of climb over the back wall and he was shot dead. Now, those murders remain unsolved, but this gang has been, regarded as the prime suspects. And what they are, and as you said, Ken describes it in his article, they're not sort of a criminal gang like the Kinnans, where you have somebody in charge of money and you have somebody in charge of logistics. They're really one of these familial crime organisations, which it's a phrase the guards use, but what it is there's people that are related to each other. And they're not highly organised in one sense, but they tend to be very tightly knit. These people can rely on each other, call on each other, and they have been linked to a lot of violence, a lot of intimidation, and are genuinely quite feared. Yeah,
and they've obviously been operating for a long time, because those murders that we're talking about, 2 of them happened, 14 years ago? And I suppose what we've been reporting this week is that a person of interest, we're not necessarily calling him a suspect yet, is a very young member with ties to that gang, and as you said, familial ties. And although, because of the nature of the gang, there's talk that he may be protected by them, but at the same time, there's a lot of anger among other people, and even, Ken is right, and even criminals, because of the shocking nature and the callous nature of this attack. So it will be interesting to see what happens in that regard. But yeah, even though the gang is operating a long time, there does seem to be people of interest who are very young but have links in a family way to that gang.
Now, the focus of the Garda intention, it has also narrowed in on the prison system. There were searches in the Midlands prison.
Yeah.
There have been, that has been looked at as a possible motive for this attack.
Yeah. Yeah, it has been. And I suppose what we've written as well is that essentially in Midlands prison, before this awful incident on Saturday, that there was some kind of row, that a man who had lived at the home where tragic Tadgh and Mary perished previously lived there, that he's in prison for suspected drug offences, that him and others are alleged to have been involved in some kind of dispute, some kind of incident, which isn't believed to have resulted in anyone receiving serious injuries. but that essentially one line of inquiry is that a serious criminal who's also in the same prison, that he may have gotten on to, he's perceived leader of this gang we've just talked about, and that he may, Gardaí are, one line of inquiry is that he may have reached out to some members of that gang in a revenge kind of situation. So that's what is being looked at as one potential thing.
Yeah, now the guards have released this CCTV that we showed at the start of this podcast for people watching it on YouTube.
Yeah.
But they have taken a very proactive stance, and sometimes the guards, when they're putting out statements, they can be very bland. That's understandable. That's the nature of their job. But you can feel, I suppose, in some of their statements, this underlying thing that these sort of crimes, they cannot be accepted in a normal society, that a 4-year-old and a 60-year-old woman that's a carer that was, involved in working in a local nursing home, by all accounts, I mean, absolutely ordinary, decent people, and a young child with his whole life ahead of him. Like, it can't be tolerated that these things happen.
No, it can't.
So I'll just read you out a bit of what the guard said, because it veers from their often very, deliberately unemotive language. It says, while this was a reckless, callous and murderous attack on a family home, An Garda Síochána continues to keep an open mind as to the reasons and motives for this attack. And it then goes on later describing what had happened, describing how they'd taken part in a Christmas tractor run. And then it says, shortly before 7:45, this family home at Castleview Park was attacked. The remains of Tadgh and his grandaunt Mary were discovered in the front room of the house where the fire was deliberately started. And it then says, An Garda Síochána continued through family liaison officers, to liaise and support the families of Tadgh and Mary, who their funerals are due up. And it kind of ends the statement thanking the people, the local community in Ealing Derry. And it says, again, which is I suppose showing the emotion even of the people working on this case. Tadgh should be with his family today. His grandaunt Mary should be working in a local nursing home where she worked for over 40 years helping this community. So, I mean, I'd say there's genuine horror from anybody who's had to come across this case, either investigating, locals, all of the people involved.
Absolutely.
Now, the funeral details have been made public now at this stage?
Yeah. Well, they've been made public for Tadgh. They haven't yet been made public for Mary. But Tadgh is going to be laid to rest on Friday morning in St. Mary's Church in Ealing Derry. And I suppose, obviously, there was an RIP notice and there were tributes to Tadgh. He's survived by all of his family, obviously, including his parents, who were understandably devastated. And I suppose there is a RIP notice for Mary, but just her funeral details haven't been yet confirmed. So yeah, it's going to take place from Kilane Drive in Eden Derry, and then it's going to go to St. Mary's Church, followed by burial in St. Mary's Cemetery. And the notice just says, Tadgh's sudden and tragic passing has left his family and friends heartbroken. Softly held in the arms of angels, he will be forever missed and remembered by his loving family.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's hard to, it's just hard to comprehend how this could happen.
No, it is. Really
okay,
is.
Well, no doubt we'll come back to this story when there's further developments in the investigation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Eimear.
Thanks, Niall.